Welcome everyone, this is Danny and Karl with Get Wisdom, and today we're going to continue with our channeling series. And today's subject is Charles Darwin, who many will cite as the father and the originator of the theory of evolution, which from some people's perspective has caused a lot of trouble, and for a lot of other people they would say he introduced a lot of clarity into the whole topic of human history and where we came from. And so this should be an interesting subject for us. We have 6 questions. And so I'd like to ask Karl, Karl, if you will, go ahead and tell us a little bit about, your perspective on this. I think this is something you've probably looked into a little bit, maybe more so than some of our other more obscure channeling subjects that we've come up with from yours truly.
Well, I think that's fair to say from the standpoint that it's a kind of sticking point for me now in having a spiritual focus and having been a scientist. So for 30 years, I was doing scientific research and trying to help medicine advance with new treatments. And all along the way, as a scientist and educated person, this is something you've grown up with in the current generation, evolution that explains where we came from. It's just grooved in. Everyone's seen this picture of the ape, kind of humped over, and then the larger ape, and then gradually becoming more erect, and you have like the early hominids, and then eventually the modern human, the Neanderthal and the modern human standing fully upright. It's just engraved. That's what happened. We evolved from these lower order species, and thanks to Darwin. So, ironically, it was only after I started on a spiritual path and had a spiritual awakening not all that long ago, it was around 2000,
Mm-hmm.
that in having more time, because I retired from my first career, I started looking at this argument, pro and con evolution. And I was literally shocked to find out that there's ample science disproving the whole notion of natural selection as an origin for life on the planet.
Right.
And you can conceive of things drifting a little genetically and maybe succumbing to selection pressure, so some species die out, and we know that happens.
Yeah.
But that's not the same as, a frog turning into
A rat.
A rat or something.
Yeah.
I mean, there are extrapolations made all the time, and it's so ingrained that scientists take it so for granted. They don't question it. They incorporate it as a talking point almost in every publication talking about natural phenomena and mammalian and other species and their makeup physically. Yeah. And I mean, there was just a thing I saw in a science article about a discovery of a little mini T-Rex. They found the skeletal remains of this thing. It's sort of like a 1 meter tall T-Rex.
Yeah.
A carnivore,
Yeah.
walking on the hind legs and the little tiny front legs and all that. And, thinking about the power of the bite, because they can measure the mechanics from the skeleton and all that. But anyway, they were talking about the feet, that unlike most feet, the bones the separate bones had fused together, presumably to give this greater strength, because it was probably able to run fast, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now, where did that even statement come from? It's a supposition. This thing evolved from other species that weren't designed to do that, but somehow this thing evolved and the bones gradually fused over the generations to create a stronger platform, and all. This is the kind of supposition that's part of science, and it's just accepted. No one questions it.
Yeah.
And the alternative is God wanted to make a little T-Rex one day and put a stronger bone so the foot would support, rapid running or whatever.
And then that
what
kind
a
of
crazy
theory,
idea,
And that kind of theory just gets ridiculed out of hand, right?
Yes.
I mean, that's such a silly idea that there'd be something that your crutch God came along and created a new species for your Earth, and it's just. It's funny how that works out. And I was having a conversation this morning at coffee about that and anthropology, and how so much, even peer-reviewed studies have to be set aside, cannot be included in everything that is taught to support something like the theory of evolution.
Yes.
Because it's not being presented as a theory anymore.
Yeah.
It's presented as fact. And we find the same thing in human anthropology, and archaeology, where there's a whole body of research that was done that can't be included in what's taught in the universities, because if it was included, it would get everybody scratching their heads. Well, that's not what we learned. So it's very interesting how it's kind of like the selection process that's going on is actually in the education, not the origin of the species.
Yeah, I think that's very, very, very true. It's a series of concepts and ideas to defend an argument that they find unpalatable, which is there was a creative force, a higher intelligence than we know of, that had something to do with all this. And they're not prepared to accept that. But that is a rigid bias that they hold. And it's not supported by the evidence, in fact.
Yeah, and it's not even their fault, in fact.
Well, that's true also. But my main argument with the whole idea of evolution, because there's lots of scientific theories, and many of them are very conjectural and so on, but they don't do any real harm. It's just, certain niche area of science arguing among itself with some respect of how things are and which mechanism is the correct explanation and so on. But when it comes to evolution, this is used as a wedge
Yes.
to drive people away from religion by mocking religion and saying, you see, the Bible is all wrong. It's just full of bull, because their world couldn't have been created in 6 days and all this sort of thing.
Right.
And that's one supposition built on top of another, and the religious people have their own makeup work to do for accepting theories based on just simple statements without good corroborating evidence, and just accepting everything in the scriptures as being the God's truth and so on. And in fact, it isn't. There's corruption, there's alteration, there's editing, and there's a lot of things left out. And that'll offend a lot of people. So, I guess I'm just kind of stepping on everyone's toes here, but there is a middle ground often in these things.
Right. And
that's often where we end up. And it may not look like it at first, but then you look at it and live with it a while, and then you realize, well, this does make sense. It explains where we came from and
the trouble.
Yeah, and the trouble. And the real issue turns out to be the turmoil all these things create. And then looking at who that serves can point to the answer for why it's there to begin with.
Yeah, well put.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the irony, because you can go and get books written by scientists that just stomp all over the idea of evolution, because it was fine back in the day when we didn't know anything about life other than what we could see with our naked eye. So, bird wings kind of look like legs. They're an appendage. They come off of a body, and so you could create these sort of simple ideas of things morphing from one thing into another and so on.
Right.
But then over vast periods of time, which they knew back in the early days would be necessary. This isn't something that happens overnight. It's going to take a long, long time. And of course, we thought we had 13 billion years to work with, and that's not true either, because life started much more recently. And so as we've learned more and more about these details, the details overwhelm the theory now.
Yeah.
You get down to the level of the cell and what takes place there. It is a wonderland of intricacy, profound orchestration of information and regulatory mechanisms on top of regulatory mechanisms that is mind-boggling in its complexity.
Right.
So evolution cannot begin to figure out how we came to even make a protein, let alone a nucleic acid, let alone a genome, and all the other things that interact with one another, all of whom are necessary.
Yeah.
Which is the big deal. You can't just start.
And simultaneously necessary.
What's that?
And simultaneously necessary.
Yes.
You can't go just build one part and then have the other part come along, and then suddenly it makes sense in combination with the old part. Actually, for any of it to make sense, several of those things had to occur concurrently for there to be a function, an assigned function. I mean, one of the books I read early on that really helped bring this back, and it was nice because it was written in pretty much layman's terms, is a book called Darwin's Black Box. And one of the topics they tackled around this very idea that you were explaining was vision, the whole phenomenon of vision in biology. And it really did lay the whole issue to rest for me. I mean, science in its traditional approach had no answer for that.
Yeah, and so what people need to realize, I think, is, we're not here just to beat up on people. So please don't think this is some kind of witch hunt and we're trying to burn people at the stake or anything, for blasphemy or whatever. This isn't religious. This is about truth and spirituality, and the fact there is room for a divine hand in things. And in fact, all the data point to it much more strongly than anything else. And the data become overwhelming as you look at that level of detail.
Right.
This is a fantastic universe. It is mind-boggling, and it cannot have happened randomly.
Yeah. And what I like to think about Get Wisdom is like, okay, so now we know this. So what? So what are we going to do? Now that we know this, so apparently Get Wisdom, the information from Get Wisdom is proposing, better ideas, more clarity, a better perspective on things. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but what are you going to do with it? Is that just fodder for your library at home, or what? And that's why I like Get Wisdom so much, is because not only along with all that, we're saying, okay, now that we know this, what are you going to do? This is what we're also helping to answer that question too. What to do,
Yeah.
And granted, it may not be for everybody. It's not going to catch on, but for some people who become aware of this stuff and they have that feeling like, okay, well, what's my part in all this? I think that's one beautiful part of Get Wisdom, is that there is a the destination offers answers to those questions as well.
Yeah. And your point is really on target here, because this isn't just esoteric knowledge, something that an academic might take interest in, but is boring to everybody else and doesn't really matter. It's just something that ends up in a book somewhere. And this is about life and survival, because we're going head to toe with a group of extraterrestrials who are here. They're in our face. They have designs on our world. And so it matters whether or not there's a God. It really, really matters.
Yes.
Because what we're told is we're doomed unless we turn back to the divine and ask the divine for help. Who's going to do it? The atheists are not going to do it. Our opposition is atheists. This should be a teachable moment.
Yeah.
Of going down that path and where you might end up. Right. Maybe preying on other worlds because you've developed all the fancy technology and artificial intelligence taken to elegant levels and have tremendous capabilities of interstellar travel and powerful weapons and being able to manipulate minds of other beings and on and on. So this matters. This argument matters, and it matters to the extent that people are being seduced by science away from faith. It's not the religion that matters. It's the faith in the Almighty that matters, and the willingness to reach out and say, okay, I'm not so sure about these guys and their crazy idea about aliens, but God, if you're listening, do what's needed. Help the world come out from under the cloud that it seems to be under, because things are a mess here. Raise everyone up who may have a hand in this and open their hearts to love. That isn't like betraying your essence as a human being, or even your intellectual prowess, or
your sovereignty.
You're not giving anything up. Yeah. And you can do it in the privacy of your own mind. No one's watching. No one will know. No one will laugh at you. And it might not have very much weight at the moment if you don't really believe. That's another thing.
Yeah.
That we're fighting here. But you got to start somewhere.
Right.
People aren't going to come back, with a solid 100% belief in God if they've drifted away or maybe never really had it to begin with, because they kind of didn't like church or whatever, and they never thought deeply about it, and it never resonated, and so they've ignored it.
Yeah.
It's hard to go back and become a true believer and have a feeling of closeness with the divine. But that's possible, and I did it. Yeah. I wasn't expecting it, and it happened to me.
Right.
So that's what we're after here. Yep. We'll see.
Yep.
See what we learn.
And today we'll do it with Charles Darwin, the light being. We'll do it with his help. That's the idea, anyway.
Yeah, a lot of irony in this. So I feel a little trepidation, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I guess you could say we have faith.
Well, see, you have to respect the man, because in the era he lived, so little was known about the details of the life force and how things are truly made.
Yeah, and it wasn't so long ago that people like him, saying things like him, were burned at the stake.
Yes.
Or excommunicated. Right. Or just killed somewhere, So, I mean, he's, in a fashion, he could be a light worker of sorts, and that'd be interesting if he addressed that issue a little bit. I hope it comes up in, I didn't ask that directly, but I mean, a couple different ways to slice this, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And it's often the case that your enemy of the moment brings you a silver lining in what they are doing, because by having to tackle their arguments and the challenges they bring, it ends up strengthening you in a way, and it keeps you honest, and it keeps you working at what you believe in. And that's a useful thing.
Yeah.
Not to be wishy-washy or fragile and vulnerable to anyone who's a naysayer, but to keep your tools sharpened and keep your brain thinking, because that's what the divine wants of us. It wants us to be thinkers and to be innovators, to be creative, and devise our own solutions for things and make our way forward, learning as we go. Otherwise, we'd have the weekly handout from the divine. We just get a download. This is what you need to know this week. We'll let you know a little more.
World.
Yeah, we'll make you a little smarter, and thanks for coming. And but it's a free for all, and what that does is puts the pressure on us. But we're responsible for the consequences, and this is what people are not thinking about.
Yeah.
They think they can just drift along and everything will work out.
Yeah.
Well, it isn't working out, and it's likely to get worse unless we wake up.
Yeah.
So
and there is some historical precedence for that.
Yes.
For things not working out.
So we're essentially revisiting one of the things that has created and maintained a complacency about the fact that religion, is just kind of obsolete. We don't really need it because science has figured things out.
Yeah, and we have evolution. It's on our science, and evolution's on our side.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, maybe we should go ahead and get started.
Okay, so as a channeler, I do my work through Creator of all it is. I go to Creator in my thoughts and ask Creator to connect me to the target I wish to speak with, and to keep safety in place and keep the communication authentic and protected from any interference. And that is very important because most intuitives just reach out into the ether with that intention to connect, but they're doing it under their own power. And they don't think about a divine being as being relevant to the discussion, even if they want to talk to a divine being. And this creates hazards. Most channelers are being corrupted. They're talking to an imposter. It's just the way it is. So there's a legion of channelers, and they're being given hand-holding and fed pablum, encouraging things, warmed over spiritual principles, some of them quite elegantly stated. But the powerful minds behind this duping know what they're about. They've been doing this for thousands of years. They know us inside out. They're highly intelligent and crafty, and they will keep us entertained, but sideline, giving people make work. Get together in your little groups and meditate and so on, but with no connection to the divine. And that's what's missing. And all of the New Age approaches to so-called spirituality, it's a kind of pseudo-spirituality in the end. If it's you in the light, you're talking about you and what the power company brings you and your electrical wiring. It has no reason to interact with you, and there's no possibility of it doing anything for you. You need to reach out to the holy force, the divine force. You can call that light, but if you don't have that in your attention, that it's coming from the Almighty,
right?
You're going to be just talking to yourself, and this is where people go wrong. So that's my little commercial to help educate people about some of the pitfalls. And I'm not happy this is the way it is, but this is the word that we hear from Creator. More than 90% of channelers are being duped. All right. So I will endeavor to connect and see if we can bring Charles Darwin forward.
Okay.
This is Charles Darwin speaking.
Thank you for joining us. Were you able to successfully transition?
I was not able to successfully transition. This was a failing for me in a way because my preparation was inadequate. I was a spiritual person much of my life, but towards the end, I had increasing struggle with the concept. And this was owing to the fact I had a heavy infestation of dark spiritual manipulators who inhabited my energy and began to influence me from within and lowered my sights, in effect, lowered my stamina, lowered my level of comfort by creating an inner anxiety and tension as my life went on. This was done by stirring up memory of past lifetimes when, with aging, the support I had, the comforts I enjoyed, all eroded, and I was left in a major struggle with major suffering, and feared these times would come again because that was drummed into me over and over and over again. So, as a consequence, I was greatly fearing death. And this is not the way to begin a journey, especially when you are the conveyance. You are not greeted with a limousine with a doorman to open it and invite you in. You must be the conveyance through your thoughts, your ability to connect with higher vibrational beings than yourself, especially if you have beaten yourself down or been bullied by others. You are always sent a welcoming committee. But if you're unable to see them and sense their presence, you will be lost in the dark for a time at least. This I wanted to emphasize to, first of all, make clear to you that the spiritual realm is very, very real. You all owe your existence to the spiritual realm. It is where you come from and where you will return when you pass away as a physical being. Your soul is immortal, and the religions have this right. So there is an almighty being, a God force, an origin of all the universe. So we are happy to discuss my past and the implications now in your world against this backdrop of reality from which I speak. I am within that plane. And this is a rare opportunity to bridge this gap between the living and the so-called dead that live on and are with Creator in the higher realms you think of as heaven. And heaven, it truly, truly is.
Okay, thank you. How was your inquiry into the theory of evolution inspired?
This was indeed my curiosity about how things work. This is well known by all scientists and many others engaged in all manner of creative, scholarly inquiry. It is a soul characteristic to be curious. Some have more of this than others. Some have quite little. Those who are blessed with an abundance of curiosity live an exciting life. It can be filled with frustration, and it can become exceedingly challenging when you are in an environment of people who are antithetically lined up against inquiry, exploration, creativity, and the creation of new ideas, new pathways to learn about how things truly happen in the world. I was a highly spiritual being, as is true of all humans. This curiosity never left me. And as I whiled away the long hours in many settings that were constrained, particularly during my travels and exploration, there were days and days and days with little to do but think. This is quite an interesting opportunity few in the modern era can indulge in or even relate to, because they are so addicted to having feedback constantly of an external nature. They don't know what to do with themselves in the absence of this stimulation. All the electronic devices, the little screens people stare at all day long, wanting to check in who is texting them, who is liking their posts in social media, what is in the news, what are people talking about in the social forums. All of these are a kind of diversion from being. They are manifestations of other people's activities, but on behalf of people not engaged with deep inquiry by and large, but simply reacting in the moment to stimuli themselves. So it is a kind of chatter. It is a kind of social interplay, but on a relatively superficial level. As a person interested in deep questions and having a burning curiosity within and a yearning to understand things more scientifically, I was in alignment with my sole purpose, which was to be a naturalist, to advance the scientific inquiry of the day. I did this with great relish and with a zealousness as well. And that is the reason I stood out and was successful in promulgating my ideas. The world was ready to expand. What happens when there is an appetite is that whoever shows up with an idea may well be embraced, at least for a time, and will be brought into the spotlight in a certain way. Their ideas may gain a following and be promoted by others and can create much interest in the scientific community to follow up on the ideas and theories that were proposed originally. If they hold water, they will be extended and built upon and potentially create a whole new foundation of a scientific discipline if they are worthy and if they are useful. And by useful, we do not necessarily mean accurate or correct, but useful in the sense of keeping the inquiry going. And to the extent they may be off target, invite critics to notice and step forward and create a challenge and perhaps return with better concepts that displace the old. This is how science progresses normally without interference. It is an exercise and a kind of sport. It appeals to the greatest minds because the challenges are great. And it requires a formidable mind, in many cases, to embrace what is known with understanding, but still with a part of the mind, be open to something different, something outside the current thinking that creates an expansion of the existing paradigm, or even a countering paradigm that would replace it entirely. This is something that happens again and again in the normal course of human events. So I was a creature of my culture, but also of my soul yearnings. This is true of everyone if they are listening and open and connected to themselves and not suppressed by their surroundings and others who might want to pigeonhole them or constrain them in some way and keep them sidelined. This too happens all too often. It happens regularly through the formal education system, for that is what it is designed to do in the current configuration. It is designed to create conformity, to stifle independent thinking and initiative, but more a rehashing as a kind of homage to the thinkers who are sanctioned and have the blessing of academia for their loftiness, their wisdom, and their truth. Or so it seems on the surface, in satisfying the kind of established perspectives. True innovation is a waning commodity. It can flourish in settings more independent. And this is why the entrepreneurial spirit can still create novelty and even change society and the world through innovation of new capabilities and a greater understanding of the universe and its forces. And then academia has to catch up. Curiosity was my central core driving force. And so I was in a position where I had the advantage of having this question of life and its origins in my thinking from my predecessors, and was interested in whether prior perspectives were in fact at all accurate about where life comes from. This is an age-old curiosity because humans want answers. They truly are wired to figure things out. to understand them completely and to use the knowledge in new ways. When there is a vacuum, a lack of awareness and understanding about something, especially something potentially quite meaningful, to a human, this is a quite unsatisfactory state of affairs. So I was attempting to bridge the gap between the thinking of old that the earth was created and everything in it, but in an improbable fashion, at least as described within the Holy Writ. And new ways of probing the natural world brought by science. And this led me to extrapolate the concepts of my forebears and use novel observations in the field to build on the theory of cause and effect as an orchestration of the diversity of life. And this created, secondarily, the possibility of it retracing its steps back to an early origin that may have gotten life started in the very beginning and then continued on with an ever branching tree of life, giving rise to all manner of diverse species. At the time, this seemed quite innovative and quite profound in its explanatory power. But like all science, explanatory power is a meager achievement if the world is wholly ignorant. In a sea of ignorance, the beggar can be king. Because if you have the only voice with an answer, there's nowhere else to turn. And you become the center of things. And this is kind of how my early thinking got started and then began to take hold. And that itself took quite a while. I was not catapulted to fame nor lionized, but my ideas were supported in a modest way and then revisited at intervals, and eventually were focused on more intensely before being embraced and becoming a central tenet in explaining what people see in front of them in the diversity of life on the planet.
Okay, thank you. How does this theory, which has taken such a firm hold on science and belief systems, serve the alien agenda? And how might it also serve the light?